Good evening. Welcome to the Fairfield City School District Board of Education meeting for November 2nd, 2023. Mrs. Lane, will you please call the order?
Mr. Begley?
Here.
Mrs. Birding Miller? Mr. Clark?
Present.
Mrs. Gundram?
Here.
Mrs. Shorter?
Here.
Thank you. Mrs. Gundram, will you lead us in the pledge?
Yes. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mrs. Gundram. We will jump right into presentations and resolutions. Mr. Smith?
Yes, Mr. Begley, members of the board, we do have two presentations scheduled this evening. The first one is in regard to the City of Fairfield tax incentive guidelines. At this time, I will turn it over to Nathaniel Kalin, Economic Development Manager from the City of Fairfield. He's already up here. Before he begins, I do want to introduce Greg Kathman from the City of Fairfield as well in the audience, Development Services Director. So welcome, Greg, as well.
Thank you, Superintendent Smith, and thank you, Board of Education, for having us this evening. Thank you to John and Nancy for setting us up. I also want to thank you for the partnership that the city and the school district have. I've been with the city just 1 week shy of 4 weeks, and I've been amazed over the last 4 years how we work so well together. Not every city and school district does have a great partnership. One event, or one example of that is the Career Fest event, which I hope you all know about, but the city and chamber came to the school district a couple years ago and said, we want to do this big thing with all your high school students, and the school district said, yeah, let's do it, and we're in our third year coming up, and it's been a great relationship. I also have a nephew who attends Central in first grade. He has some special need issues, and his parents just can't say good enough things about their education in Fairfield City Schools. So just want to thank you all before we get started. And I wish I could talk to you about something more exciting than tax incentives, but that's what we'll dive into tonight. So before we get into tax incentives, we'll want to take a little step back and talk about economic development in general, talk about tax incentives on a broad level, zero in on property tax incentives, which is where the tax incentive guidelines become relevant for the school district, and then talk about updating those guidelines and some next steps. So when we think about economic development, you hear a lot about tax incentives. When you hear about a new company moving into the area, typically you hear about the incentives it's receiving, but that's just one piece of the puzzle. When we think about economic development in our office, we're thinking about all the different things that a company, an investor is thinking about when they're looking at locating jobs, looking at investing in a property, that kind of thing. A big piece of that is available and skilled workforce, so that's talent, and the school district is obviously a big piece of that. Another piece is transportation access and infrastructure. So Fairfield, we have a good road network. We also have good proximity to highways, which mean, and good location nationally. So we're close to the rest of the country for distribution. We also can get employees from Dayton, from Northern Kentucky, from Indiana. So, and we do have employees from all those areas commuting into Fairfield. You have to have good utility infrastructure, so we're constantly coordinating with our water and sewer and Duke Energy for electric and gas, and fiber is a piece of that too. You obviously have to have available sites and buildings, so we're always looking at our inventory of real estate, and Fairfield is a community that has an ever-decreasing amount of greenfield sites, so we're looking more at redevelopment. And we need a business-friendly development process, and we think Fairfield is very business-friendly. We have our planning functions, our building review functions, our engineer, all those things internal. We try to be very business-friendly when someone wants to come and invest in the community. So we think we compete very well in the first 5 bullets here, but sometimes you do have a project where they're looking at another community and they also compete well. Or maybe we have a deficiency in our site, maybe it's in a floodplain or needs some type of infrastructure, and so sometimes we do need to compete. Maybe there's some type of direct assistance, the city provides some infrastructure, or we think about a property tax abatement or something like that. When we think about tax incentives too, there are obviously local incentives, which we're going to talk about tonight, but all levels of government have some type of have different types of programs and assistance opportunities. And these are just a few examples. So on the federal level, there's something called Opportunity Zones. You may have heard about that. It's a tool to try to attract investors to certain census tracts, and we do have a couple of those within the city of Fairfield. From the state level, it's common that new job creation projects for companies that are creating new jobs in the state of Ohio may get a state tax credit, may get some type of workforce assistance from the State Department of Development or Jobs Ohio or other entities. On the county level, the Butler County Port Authority has been a partner in a number of projects. They can provide sales tax exemption on construction materials, so that makes the cost of new construction lower. Then the local level, there's property tax incentives, which we'll talk more about tonight. There's also income tax incentives, which is something actually that new for the city of Fairfield. We haven't done many of those in the past, but we're actually proposing to our city council to incorporate into these guidelines. It would not impact school revenue. It's city income tax. So talking about property tax incentives individually, Ohio Revised Code, state law, provides a number of programs that local governments can put in place to create investment and grow jobs. First one up there is tax increment financing, or TIFs, and you probably heard of those. Those are not referenced directly in the guidelines. We don't typically use those for specific projects, and the 3 large TIF districts that are within the city of Fairfield, we've set up to hold the school district harmless. So you get a check in the same amount of the taxes that were put into the TIF fund. So that would have equated to what the school district received without those TIFs. So again, that's not really what we're here to talk about tonight. The next 2 are, though, enterprise zones and community reinvestment areas. We don't use enterprise zones too much these days. We haven't in a decade or so, but those are on the books, and so we've addressed those in the guidelines. But CRAs, community reinvestment areas, we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. That's the significant tool that provides a property tax abatement on the value of new value created when a building's constructed, when it's renovated, or added onto. Again, I'll talk about that in a second. All these programs require annual reporting, so the companies or the developers who are receiving the incentives report to the city. We have a tax incentive review council that includes the school district. John and Nancy and I will be at a meeting next week actually on this, looking at the incentives from last year. And this program is really a partnership between the cities and school district because a lot of the majority of property tax revenue, the school district is the beneficiary of, so it impacts the school district there. And because of that, we've established tax incentive guidelines, which we'll talk more about tonight, so that both parties are on the same page as far as how we're considering and approving tax incentives. So I want to talk a little bit more about community reinvestment areas, or CRAs. Again, this is a mechanism where we can abate only new value. So if a building is constructed, if it's enlarged, if there's an addition, if there's something that creates a new taxable value, we can abate a portion of that property tax. So if someone comes to us and they have an existing building, we're not able to take that off the tax rolls or something. So we're only talking about new value that could potentially be abated in the CRA. Primarily when we evaluate a project, we are looking at what type of investment are they bringing, what are the jobs and payroll numbers, and you'll see how that works in later slides. In the city of Fairfield, right now we have 14 active CRA projects. In the last 6 years, we've approved just 11. So it seems like we work on CRA a lot, but we don't actually always generate that many projects. So it's usually 1, 2, 3 a year, something like that. 2023 will probably, it looks like we won't have any projects approved. And we have 3 districts, so CRA projects can only be approved within certain CRA areas, districts that are established by the city. So our largest district is the city of Fairfield CRA, that red area outlined in red. It follows both sides of Route 4 and all the industrial areas basically on the east side of the city. That's where basically all of the active incentives are at the moment. We do have one incentive that's expiring at Mack and Gilmore. There's a small district there around Cincinnati Financial, and Cincinnati Financial is the beneficiary of that, the one that's expiring. We also have a district in the town center area around Pleasant and Nillis that follows Pleasant Avenue down to John Gray. We don't have any projects in there right now. I want to share some example projects with you. These are all projects completed or underway. So the first one, Standex Electronics. This is a really quality project. They're a manufacturer that they make a lot of various electronic devices and components. They relocated from the city of Cincinnati up to Fairfield. A few years ago, they promised 130 jobs. They're now at a little more than 200 jobs. So they really have grown here. They need to enlarge their parking lot. And so that's been a really successful economic development story for us. Pacific Manufacturing, that's another project, or that's another example project. It's an expansion, but it's another company that has done nothing but grow here. I think the latest expansion was their 12th. They just continue to add on to the building and to the site. The last project, they actually added on to one of their larger buildings and built a standalone separate building. And they're always talking about growth there. And then Fairfield Trade Center, this is a little different type of project. This is a speculative Class A industrial park. It's 2 buildings. Speculative means that there is not necessarily a company identified, that a developer's developing the buildings, but with a performance-based tax incentive, meaning that they have committed to create a certain amount of payroll. They're going to attract a certain quality of jobs to generate that payroll, or they would pay a shortfall payment. And the reason I want to talk about that is, really the site and impact. So this property, you may have never seen it, but it's right at the edge of Fairfield and Westchester Township on Union Center Boulevard. There's a little street there called Firebird. It has a cul-de-sac, and you may have parked there if you've ever walked on the canal trail that's back there. But there are 76 acres within the city of Fairfield and the school district. Excuse me. That are almost all in the floodplain. That pink area is floodplain. It's really low-lying, bad soils, and we never expected that to develop. Actually, the developer, the property owner, at multiple times approached the city and asked us to buy it, or they would give it to us at a discount to create park space. One time, it was talked about for baseball fields, which doesn't generate a lot of revenue for the city or for the school district. The property is, it's currently CAUV value and probably only generates a couple $100 in taxes every year. But we had a developer come in with a lot of experience, and they thought that they could build, basically bring in a lot of dirt, build 2 pads, and put 600,000 square feet of Class A industrial space on the property. So we felt like that was a project that was worth supporting. There was a lot of cost to do that. So that's why we worked with the school district to establish a CRA on that property. At the end of the day, we'll have a site that is, industrial tax land, and 2 large buildings on it that will, in the future have jobs and additional revenue for the city and school district. So we think that's a very successful example. But I also want to show you some projects that are not abated, because the majority of new construction and investment you see in Fairfield are not CRA projects. They're not projects that are receiving subsidy. So these are 4 industrial examples. The top 2 are pretty prominently positioned. You may have seen them. Fisher Park North is just north of the Fisher Body Plant there, right on Dixie Highway, the railroad underpass. And then at the corner of Bypass 4 in Port Union, there's a new industrial building. Both are about 150,000 square feet. Those were completed without abatements. And then a couple that are a little more hidden back on Quality Boulevard and 630 Commerce Center are 2 other buildings as well. We've also seen a number of standalone restaurants, quick service, fast food, and fast casual restaurants, about 8 or 9 under development in Fairfield the last 5 or so years. About 6 are on the screen. But again, that's all market driven. Those are projects that are, when they're delivered, they're fully on the tax rolls and new value. And then just showing some miscellaneous projects. We have a new hotel that went up at Seward and Route 4. Jungle Gems has put on several expansions in the last few years. Mercy renovated a building on Patterson Drive in the town center. And we have single-family housing. We don't typically abate single-family housing anyways, but we do have some single-family housing occurring in Emerald Lake and other areas, and that's all non-abated. So again, just wanted to give you some examples of projects that are happening that are totally market-driven. So getting into the tax incentive guidelines, I think the draft guidelines are in your packet, but this is a document that has a history of about 2 decades At that time, in the early 2000s, the city and school district came together and wanted to put something on paper so that economic development staff could go out, talk to companies and developers, negotiate deals, and if they followed the guidelines, have some assurance that when you go to city council, when you go to Board of Education, that everyone's going to say, yeah, well, that makes sense. We're willing to approve that because we've determined the guidelines up front. And that's been a very successful model. I'll tell you that it's a little bit unique. Not a lot of our peer communities have that. I was doing a lot of research this year as we were looking to update them, and there are some communities that have documents that are similar, but I think ours is the most comprehensive, and I think it's been successful at having a good relationship between both entities. But there are some revisions and updates that are needed. Some of it's just inflation and wage growth and things that has changed some of the metric numbers for us. We've also had several state law changes that have impacted the CRA program. And we also want to talk about a new type of project, which I'll get to a little later. So the guidelines talk about several different types of projects and how we might handle that. This first slide shows industrial and office projects, and this is kind of our bread and butter project. Of those 14 projects, active projects, the majority of those are this type of project where we're identifying a company, an industrial company, an office company that is going to come and create jobs. And in those projects, we look at what is their investment, what is their payroll, and how many jobs are they created. And we use this chart basically to determine eligibility and then how to size the abatement, meaning what percentage and for how many years would it can continue, so the rate and term. Now, this isn't the only factor we use as far as eligibility. There are certain industries that we may not target, may not offer an abatement to, and even if you meet these metrics, we may not offer an incentive, but this is an eligibility requirement on top of being attracted to the project otherwise. But so for instance, if we had a project, a developer who came in with a company that was going to invest $5 million to build a building and buy equipment, they were going to create, let's say it's 55 jobs and $3 million in payroll, we probably put them in that second line and say, your maximum rate could be 55%, and we could take that up to 6 years. And, we may or may not offer the full incentive depending on the deal and the competitiveness and those types of things. And sometimes you won't necessarily see a project that follows the line exactly. Their investment may be higher, their payroll may be lower, so we have to work a little bit with that. But we'll typically, on the staff level, work that out, talk that out with Nancy before we propose that. So again, this is, and here we have updated the investment numbers and the payroll numbers. So the investment numbers used to increase by a factor of 1.5 million. Now we're going up by 2.5 million. And the payroll numbers are now based on $50,000 annual salary jobs instead of 40,000 annual jobs in the old chart. So, by and large, I think this is really just updates, as business as usual, but it's an important chart for us as we look at economic development projects. This next slide shows a couple different types of projects. So the first one being speculative projects. We kind of talked about that a little bit with Fairfield Trade Center. Historically, the city of Fairfield did not support or incentivize speculative development because you didn't have a company that could tell you how many jobs and how much payroll they were creating. That changed a little bit in 2020. We had a project called Fairfield Commerce Park. I hope some of you recognize that name, but it's the redevelopment of the Liberty Mutual property on Seward Road. And in that project, we had some certain circumstances. We were losing a top 3 employer in the city. We wanted to redevelop that site and get jobs there quickly. We also had a very capable quality developer that approached us and proposed a performance-based tax abatement. So they said, we don't know what the companies are that are going to move in here, but we'll commit to 1 job for every 2,000 square feet we build at a certain payroll. And if we don't generate that, we'll pay you the income tax that you didn't receive because we didn't bring those jobs. And they said, we anticipate that we will bring a mix of, some logistics companies that may not have high job numbers. We'll also bring some manufacturers that are going to have a lot of jobs and good payroll. And that is actually what has happened. They built 5 buildings as part of Fairfield Commerce Park. All 5 of them are leased. The 5th one is finishing up construction. It's been leased for a couple months now. And we have a good mix. We have several really solid manufacturing companies. We have a couple logistics companies. We have a couple kind of in the middle of that. So we're really pleased with how that project's going. So we've approved a couple additional speculative projects since then, like Fairfield Trade Center. And that site was, and all those sites we've really looked at and evaluated them based on how the quality of the site is. Is it flat? Is it outside of the floodplain? You know, those types of things. And if the site is in good shape to be developed, you know, by a private company, then we've said, well, we don't want to abate that site, but if there's challenges, we've been willing to participate. But we'd like to expand that a little bit and provide it, you know, a couple different additional criteria where we may look at a speculative project that are listed on the screen there. So if there's some type of significant investment in infrastructure that a developer has to make or agrees to make for a project, for instance, you know, if the project needs some significant water line, road construction, something like that, that is over and above what a typical developer would be responsible for, that might be a reason to participate in that project. Or if the developer was able to make a strong argument that they were going to be able to attract a higher quality user because that abatement's in place, then we may be able to consider it under that circumstance. And we think there is an argument for that last point because some of those buildings that I showed you that are not abated have not necessarily filled up as quickly or with as quality of tenants as some of the abated product that we have in the community. We would still use the look at that table, that jobs, investment, and payroll from the previous slide, and we're going to, for all those projects, we would propose to set them up to be performance-based with a requirement for the number of jobs and shortfall payments if those were not met. So we would still drive developers to bring us jobs and quality projects within those buildings. And then finally, we want to talk a little bit about redevelopment projects. So this is probably the newest thing within the guidelines. This is basically the realization. The city of Fairfield is nearly 70 years old at this point, and we have a lot of properties, a lot of parts of the community that were developed several decades ago. The Route 4 corridor, some of our older industrial areas to the north, the town center area around Pleasant and Nilles, and the city has really emphasized looking at those areas, finding opportunities to redevelop some of those properties. Sometimes the city may be directly involved, sometimes it may be a public-private partnership. But for those types of projects, we want to acknowledge that we may not necessarily be looking at that scale of jobs, investment, and payroll, but there may be reasons to consider providing a property tax abatement. And so we have 3 that we're proposing to put, 3 justifications essentially to put in the guidelines. Removing blight, reactivating underutilized properties, adding quality of life amenities, or activating prioritized commercial corridors and districts. So we recognize that those projects are going to be a little different. We're not going to have guidelines that tell us exactly what the rate and term should be. So we're going to have to look at those project performas and budgets, understand what their funding gap is, understand and more actively negotiate what a reasonable abatement might be, and have more conversations between the city and the school district about what that looks like. But all of these projects would come before city council and school board for approval. Which is a good segue into the next slide here to talk about school compensation. The older guidelines, the existing guidelines, don't actually talk very much about how school compensation is handled. You bowl of water, I guess. Oh, you're okay. Over the years, our procedures for how we've handled school compensation has evolved a little bit, working with Nancy in the district. But thank you, Scott. This is the allergy time of year. State law, he took care of me. So state law actually allows cities to grant a CRA project without school district approval if it's within a certain number of years and percentage. It's not our intention to do that. We've always liked the partnership, liked to bring projects before the school district. to get a school compensation agreement approved by both the school district, the developer, and the project. That's our intention to continue to do that, which we think is a very important part of our process and relationship. One thing we're proposing, and this has been practiced in the last several agreements, is to basically memorialize within the guidelines the practice we've been using where the school compensation payment, so when there's an abatement issued, the developer or the company will typically make they will always make a commitment to make a school compensation to the payment to the school district each year that they're receiving an abatement. And that value has changed, that amount has changed, but the last few years we have set basically at a 33% payment, 33% of the abatement value. And that breaks down to 32% to Fairfield Schools and 1% to Butler Tech, which is basically proportional to the millage that both entities receive from the typical tax revenues. That's easier to see on this slide. This is an example of school compensation. So here we're proposing a 200,000 square foot building. That's a common industrial product in Fairfield. Let's say we're going to propose a 65% abatement rate. We can estimate the value of that building at something like $12 million. That would be about $4.2 million. That would be a $4.2 million assessed value through the county auditor. That would generate at current tax rate levels about $62,000 a year for the school district, and that's non-abated tax. So that's the 35% of the building that is not abated. And then from that 65% that is abated, you could expect a school compensation payment of around $52,000. So at the end of the day, the school district would get about $114,000 in new revenue off the building. The developer or the company would receive about $110,000 in abatement. And again, we're only abating new revenues. That's not existing revenues. Another benefit to the school district is a lot of these sites are, they're greenfield sites, they're CAU properties. So you may be getting a couple $100 in property tax off of them right now. When they're developed, then they're no longer agricultural sites, they're industrial sites, and they're taxed that way. So instead of getting several $100, you get in the tens of thousands of dollars in property tax revenue off of them. So as far as next steps, we've been briefing our city council throughout the update process this year. We plan to introduce the proposed guidelines to them like we have to you tonight on November 13th. Then we're going to ask if the school board would consider approving a resolution basically blessing the everything but the income tax part of the guidelines. Your meeting on November 16th, and then we would go back to City Council for full approval of the guidelines on December 4th. Are there any questions? I'll take a drink of water.
Questions? I appreciate the report. When you talk about abatements, I think it would be short-sighted to sit here and say, oh, we don't want to lose income. I think there's a real advantage in doing this because, to your point, a lot of these properties, you're not abating everything, right? A lot of these properties may not be usable otherwise unless we make it attractive to our business partners. We've got a great a great relationship with the city and the community. I was fortunate enough to serve as a member of this board representative to the Planning Commission, got to work with Mr. Kathman. I think you guys do a tremendous job. There's a lot of good things going on here, right? And when you look back at some of our longtime city partners or business partners like Cook Foods, or you mentioned Pacific Manufacturing or Cincinnati Financial, that probably received abatements many, many years ago and continue to be viable businesses in Fairfield and grow, it benefits everyone.
I was one of those board members. I was really hesitant about abatements, just in the idea that, or the belief that I had that it was not making school districts whole. However, over the years, I've seen where there's definitely been a great benefit and it fosters good development between the school district and the business community. So I do see it from both sides now. So I'm looking forward to, seeing this project go, however it develops. I think the fact that you've been able to take lands that weren't really good for anything and make the investments and bring those properties into some type of fulfillment, that's a great thing. I think it's good to have innovation and to look at these relationships and to look at the benefit that there is for school districts. We have to be mindful about just right now with the situation with property taxes for the individual property owners. Sometimes those abatements can be seen as they can be seen, in different lights, but I think as long as you educate the public, and this was a perfect opportunity to come and bring this information out and basically get it out there to the public so that they can understand and see more of what your strategic vision is. So thank you so much for sharing that. Thank you for coming out and bearing with your allergies and just letting us know what's going on. We appreciate the partnership.
Thank you. We do as well.
Nathaniel, thank you. This is very transparent. The relationship that we have with the school, the city, and the community is unbelievable. Like you said, it's not like this everywhere, unfortunately. So I'm very thankful that we live in a community that has this togetherness. So the kind of the tweaking or kind of making some of these decisions and some of these deals kind of as the business needs, right? It's not cookie cutter, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
That's right.
And that's really cool that we can be that flexible with businesses coming in, because that helps everybody. So, and we help everybody, helps the schools, helps the city, and helps the students. So thank you for that.
Thanks, Scott.
And Mrs. Lane, you always are a part of this, as well as Mr. Clemens, and so I appreciate your work on that as well.
Thank you.
I'm sure the city sees you as a viable partner as well.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
All right, our second presentation is in regard to our state report card. At this time, I will turn it over to Mrs. Aug and friends.
I don't normally have to lower the microphone. All right, thank you, Mr. Smith, Mr. Begley, members of the board. I'm here tonight with my team, Georgine Bowman, Dan Jeffers, and Katie Postfishel, to give you an overview of the district's performance on the Ohio State report card. So as we know, the report card is intended to give us information to understand our areas of strengths and the areas that we need for improvement. So some people might think that we only look at this through a deficit lens, focusing solely on the negative and where we need to improve. And that is one piece of it, but we also analyze those areas of strength to understand what we're doing well there and what strategies can be applied elsewhere to help us improve. The release of the report card really gives us a chance to both celebrate and get better. But the report card, as you know, is just one part of the district's story. And that's why many districts also release a quality profile as a complement to the report card to capture more of the great things happening in our schools every day. And Angie Neal does a phenomenal job on ours each year, and we really appreciate that, or really appreciate having that as a complement to the report card. So I did link it here so people can read that and have access to that to see what we're doing as a district to help support academic success. So let's jump into the details of the report card. This is a quick overview of the components: achievement, progress, early literacy, gap closing, and graduation. That college, career, workforce, and military readiness is currently a report only. We won't get a component rating on that until either the end of 2024, maybe 2025. We don't even have a definitive answer on that quite yet. So that pathway is similar to the old Prepared for Success component. So when we come back in January for our Pathways to the Future presentation, we'll share some of the data relevant to that component. It's CCP and AP and, again, military readiness and ACT, all of those types of things. So also of note here is the overall rating, which is calculated from these component scores, and that is new for this year. So I'll talk about that a little more in a couple minutes. So as you might remember, last year was the first year of the new rating system. We went from the A to F model to a new STAR system. We really like this change because it established consistency in the rating system across all components. So in this system, we clearly know whether or not we're meeting state standards in each component. And each rating means the same thing for each component. In the old system, a C for one component could mean something different from a C in another component, and that was really hard to explain to people. So we really appreciate the consistency in this system. So I also included on this slide, just for reference, kind of the distribution of the rating system. This is across the state for each component area. So as I've told you before, we were very happy with our overall results. The district met state standards in achievement, progress, early literacy, and graduation, and we significantly exceeded expectations in gap closing. So the next few slides I'm going to go through fairly quickly, but they are going to show how we compared to other districts. So this is our comparison to other GMC schools. And then to Butler County schools. This is another good year for us. We like to compare ourselves to the other big districts in the county. And we are still on top again this year, which we're very happy about. We have to share it with Lakota this year, but, you know, we're okay with that. We'll share, just maybe for 1 year. But for the purposes of this presentation, we'll focus mostly on our similar districts. You know, we spend a lot of time comparing ourselves to other county schools, to maybe our conference schools, but this is really the more relevant comparison. And ODE has a whole similar district methodology, and that is linked in the presentation, and they provide this list of schools to us. It can change, and it does change from year to year a little bit, but this is what we will be referencing as we move through the presentation. So I mentioned earlier the new overall rating, and I want to talk about this before we dig into each component. So we get a total point value for each component area, and that is then used to calculate a weighted point value for each component. So as you can see, the components carry different weights. So the state is placing more emphasis on achievement and progress than the other components. Our total point value this year put us in the 3.5 star range. We were only 0.125 away from a 4-star rating, so that was pretty exciting. So hopefully next year. The overall rating is the only time where you will see this half-star rating. The other components are just full stars, but all of them are out of 5. The 3.5 stars in this component means that we are meeting state expectations. Each school building also earned an overall star rating this year. And those formulas and weights are different from what is up here because each school has different components that it's rated on. So this only applies to the district. But even in the school calculation, achievement and progress still count more. but it could be up to 40% in some cases, like for our middle schools. So here are overall ratings by school. Certainly a point of celebration is to know that each building met state expectations across the district. And then if you look at Compass, Central, North, and South, all of those buildings are exceeding state expectations.
I apologize.
So now let's dig into the components. Let's start with achievement, and this is how well students did on state tests. This whole component is how well our kids performed on those end of course exams and Ohio State tests in grades 3 through 8. It also includes the performance index. So we get more points for students who score above proficient and fewer points for students who score below proficient. And the reason I wanted to share this particular graph with you is because it does go back to pre-pandemic era. And I think you can kind of see where the pandemic happened. We dipped quite a bit, and you can see that we've grown each year since. And so it will be really nice once we get back to those pre-pandemic levels, but it's clear that we're moving in the right direction. And then back to looking at our similar district comparison for this component. Fairfield City obviously is highlighted there. If you look in the ranking column, Fairfield is obviously the 0. Our most similar district this year is Willoughby Eastlake City, and that is ranked number 1, so you see them right below us. And then Reynoldsburg City at number 2, and so on. So that's what those ranking numbers mean. So we perform pretty well compared to the districts that are most similar to us. Oh, and then, no, why is it not going back? Okay. Then I thought this was really important to share as well. This is our performance index compared to similar districts, and you can see us there. This is a snip from like one of our data dashboards, and it doesn't show it just shows their IRNs at the bottom, so I had to put arrows and tags and stuff, so that's why it looks a little bit funky. But you can see that in terms of performance index, compared to our 5 most similar districts, we were second. So that's something, for us to be really proud of. And so at this time, I am going to turn it over to Georgine to talk about progress.
Thanks, Mandy. So progress is basically looking at how our kids are progressing from year to year and where they're going. You can see that in our progress component, we've met expected standards, and we'll go a little bit into the specifics of each test, basically. So this screen just shows all of our ELA components and the OST and the end of course exams and where we stand. Yellow means there's little evidence or less evidence of growth. Green means that we are at expected growth, and blue means that we have exceeded expected growth. Here's our math scores. And here's progress in social studies and science. So that's overall the progress component. They look at each assessment. They give us an idea of where we stand and give us an idea of where it is that we need to possibly make some targets and improvements. The other component is the early literacy component, and that's the other that I'm responsible for. The early literacy component looks at 3 different measures. It looks at the proficiency in 3rd grade reading, so that is just the achievement score, basically. It looks at promotion to 4th grade, which has been interesting these past couple of years, and it looks at improving the K-3 literacy. So each of those components has a different weight. For the schools which are the elementary schools that actually have that as part of their report cards, proficiency in third grade reading is 40%, promotion to fourth grade is 35%, and then improving K-3 literacy is 25%. Looking at our district comparisons, that's where we're at. We're a little bit above the middle of the road there, so we're working in the right direction as far as this component goes. These are our similar districts again. So the first piece is the proficiency. We're at 67.6% as far as the students that have made the achievement rate on the OST for third grade. That puts us above district or above the state as far as our overall percentage and above the similar districts that are also included in our stratum. The promotion to fourth grade, they give us scores of which we look at. We can use the OST for ELA. We can also use the reading subscale score. And then we can also look at MAP, NWEA MAP, which is an assessment that we use. And they give us those three components to consider when we're looking at retention. This year, there's been a change in the state law. It was interesting because over the summer it was one thing, and now this summer it's a different thing. But basically, if students do not meet any of these things, parents can request that students not be retained. And so that requires us, as it would anyway, to put students into a plan that provides them some intensive intervention. Component or measure 3 is the improving literacy from K-3. The biggest, this is hard to explain, but the biggest thing I want you to see is that in kindergarten, we have more kids that are off track, but as they progress through the grades or as our kids are going from K to 3, we have less students that are off track all the time and more students that are on track according to the state. So we're making gains and we're moving them all in the right direction, so I think those are all good things. I think I hand it to Dan.
Gap closing. Gap closing component is a measure of the reduction of the educational gaps for student groups based on goals set by the Ohio's Every Student Succeeds Act. So these goals are set for us ahead of time. As you can see from the graphic here, we range from 3 to 5 stars in each building. Combined, those result in a 5-star rating for the district. There are 6 components as part of the GAP, 6 areas that include English language arts, academic achievement and growth, math, academic achievement and growth, graduation, English learner language proficiency, chronic absenteeism, and gifted performance. The state expectation for all areas and all student groups is to continue closing the educational gaps from year to year. So the red dot is the goal set for us by the state, and then the bar is what we achieved on the left. On the right is the growth index for English language arts, and then we have math, achievement and growth, and the red line on the subgroup on the math growth, the red line is the point where you've met with the expectation and exceeded the expectation, so that in that area in math we exceeded the expectation. And then for graduation, the student groups, the red dot is the goal, the bar is what we achieved. English learners, we overachieved there as well. And absenteeism, chronic absence, 22.1% was ours. The state, for reference, was 26.8%. So we did really well there. And then gifted, our value-added rating 4 stars in gifted. This is the comparison to the similar districts. We were number 5 in that comparison. And just for reference, The only other two in our area, Northwest was 15, Oak Hills was 5, just before us. And then from Montgomery County, Huber Heights was 20, Kettering was 8, Northmont was 3, and Miamisburg was 11. So just for some reference.
Could you go back to the math growth on the gap closing? Explain that red line again.
From
The
-2
subgroup.
to 2 is the expected, above 2 is above the expected growth. So in that one particular subgroup, we were above growth.
So only that one subgroup.
Was above, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Above the expected.
Thank you.
Another component that we are rated on is graduation, and it takes in consideration our 4-year graduation cohort and our 5-year graduation cohort. And this year it's a weighted, so our students within the 4-year is weighted at a 60%, and our students within the 5-year is weighted at a 40%. And if you look up at the weighted graduation rate, you'll see that we are a 92.9, which is just a little smidgen below us obtaining 4 stars. So it looks like hopefully we are on track for the 2024 report card to obtain 4 stars in graduation. So we're looking forward to that. And then below, you'll see that currently we're at a 92.3 in regards to our 4-year cohort. But the trend is, you'll see the bottom line, the red trend is the state. The green is our similar districts, and we are the blue. So we are significantly above our state, and then also above our similar districts, sorry. And then same for our graduation for 5 years, significantly above the state, and then also our similar districts. And there we are 93.9, like I indicated, with our similar district of 91.5. Any questions?
Questions?
I did have one. It was just something I wanted some clarification on, but it's back in, let me go back and find it. Okay. It was back on slide number 14, and it was ELA. I was trying to understand, okay, so the not applicable, I think I missed the explanation on that. So that last line, it was the English Language Arts 2 accountable, and we had a light blue, which meant we were above expectations, but it was not applicable. So can you give the?
I think it's you can't say it as a specific. Yeah, it just says NA because we can't say that that's attributable to a specific grade level. So
Okay.
the OST above the ELA, where it says 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, that's by grade level.
Yep.
ELA 2 could be taken by freshmen, sophomores, juniors, depending. So they don't put a grade level attached to it.
Oh, I see.
So that's all the NA is.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
All right. Yeah, thank you so much for putting this together. And, I've been looking at these from the day one. I definitely like the system that they have now, converting it to the stars. I think that is a more holistic way of looking at it. And I'm very grateful that you've got the comparisons in there, because a lot of times, we're being compared to districts that we are not really, or that we really shouldn't necessarily have that, straight line comparison. So it's good to see the districts that we are actually comparable to when it comes to the economic level, and just the size of the district and those sorts of things. But I am very appreciative of the progress that's been made. The chart that it stands out for me the most, it does show how we've actually made that rebound since 2019 with COVID, if I can find those numbers by that chart.
Yeah, it's slide 12.
Slide 12, okay. Yeah, I just wanted to point one thing out on that chart. I'm not sure if my other board members noticed it, but, okay, no, that's actually not it. Okay, yes, it is slide 10, and it was under achievement. So if you look really, really closely at that little light blue sliver for 2023, that's indicative of our Advanced Plus. And I noticed that that sliver is greater than the sliver that we had prior.
Like your sliver.
I'm sorry. It's the little things, you got to look at those things.
I don't see
So,
that sliver existed at all in 2020. I don't see
You
it.
see it?
No,
Pull
I
it
don't
up.
see it at all.
See, well, and we're excited when we look at this. We're like, ooh, look at that, look at the orange and green and black and the blue. It's so much bigger. The purple and the pink are shrinking. So we live in that world too, Galena. We understand.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm looking at all of it, but that just stuck out because I think for the Advanced Plus, that's indicative of the fact that we've got such a diverse population and we're taking care of learners at every level, differentiated education, and that sliver indicates to me that we're doing it. So I am happy to point that out. For other members, I know that's one of those little small things, but it caught my attention, and I'm grateful for that. Thank you. I think
Thank you.
that's it for me. No problem.
Other questions, concerns?
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I didn't really have a question, just more of a comment. I was encouraged by slide 21 where it showed improving the K through 3 literacy. Because these were kids that were very much affected by the pandemic. My daughter's in 2nd grade now, but she didn't do preschool because of the pandemic. And so I was trying to teach her to read on my own, and I was doing it all wrong. So, her kindergarten teacher kind of had to start over and fix all the things that I messed up. But so it's nice to see, and she's taken off in strides since kindergarten. And so it's nice to see that that's the progress that all of our kids are making, that we're seeing larger chunks hit that on-track level every year, and that's very encouraging.
Can I just build on that for a second? Because that was one of my main points. It is great, but we start with the kindergarten diagnostic that says 2 out of 3 kids aren't on track. And that's a problem, and you've talked a lot about our kindergarten setup, need for pre-K. There it is.
There it is, and we talk about it all the time. It's our hope, it's our dream for the future someday. We're not there yet. We have other things to tend to, but that is a goal of ours. That we would love to have, an early childhood learning center and expand our preschool services and full-day kindergarten. That would make all the difference in the world for that K-3 literacy. And it's just what's best for kids. And, there used to be a lot of districts that were half-day kindergarten, and now we are the exception. There aren't very many left, and our kindergarten staff does an outstanding job, as evidenced by some of the data that you see this evening. But it would, like I said, it's something that we would love to do. It's our hope, it's our dream for the future.
No, that's very well put, and Mrs. Gundram's right. We completely reverse that from 2 out of 3 to 1 out of 3 by the time they reach 3rd grade. But what if we were focused on other things than fighting that battle? I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Oh, no, you're fine. And, I mean, that is a good point, that if the kids were exposed to that all day instead of a half a day, where would they be? Would they get there quicker? But yes, the kindergarten staff does do amazing things. Like, I remember when my daughter was in kindergarten, every night she had a calendar and we had to write down what books we read together. And my, God love her, my niece, who is in 5th grade now, she was like, she has homework in kindergarten? And I was like, yeah, we're just reading, it's fun, But it made all the difference just to sit down and read with her every night, too, so.
Gotta love those homework folders.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I very much appreciate, too, that, there's this saying out there, like, it's good enough for government work. I hate that saying. I really do. And I very much appreciate that we can celebrate the successes that we're seeing, but we know there's always more that we can do, and that's evident in the steps that all of you take to keep making progress and keep moving forward and keep expecting more. So thank you all very much.
I just add that I agree with everything the fellow board member said, and Ms. Shorter, my favorite slide is the achievement slide as well. I like the incline there from the C word era. The dwindling of the pink and the blue, and the rising of the black and the blue up top there. So that's exciting to see, and all those kids now that are in 6th grade were in 1st grade or 3rd grade, and it goes back 3 years. What a time that was for the kids, and there's still some repercussion from that, but we're working through it, and this is a great example of how we're working through that. So thank you all very, very much.
Mrs. Aug, 3 things really stood out to me. Mrs. Shorter hit on the kindergarten, or Mrs. Gundrum hit on the kindergarten piece. Promotion of 4th grade, and then the optional retention, which is another component of House Bill 33 that Dr. Rice has talked about and will probably continue to mention as that huge piece of legislation unwinds. So it's optional now, and a parent can decide to not retain the student.
Yes, so all students will be promoted unless a parent requests retention.
I think it's still so important that we're meeting that 3rd grade requirement as best we can, and pushing forward from there. And retaining a student simply because they haven't met that is a difficult standard. But then reducing that standard to 0 implies that we're not going to push as hard, and I don't want that to be the case here.
And I think, the good thing I can say about that is, in our buildings, it still means a team meeting. It's not just going to be, well, you're promoted and there's no discussion. We take all of these decisions, whether it's under the old rules or these new rules, very seriously, because we want to do what's in the best interest of the child, and we want to make sure that, if the decision is that they're promoted or retained, that it's done so with appropriate supports so that they can see success in the future. We don't want any child to fall through the cracks, and this is such an important time in their development.
It is. It absolutely is. Thank you. And that even comes through in the book we read, talking about early literacy, how important it is. Last, chronic absenteeism, right? That's just such a high number, and I know we beat the state standard significantly, as Mr. Jeffers alluded to, but that's just too high. And the standard of 10% of educational, instructional time, that doesn't seem like such a high standard that we're still at 22%.
No. And, we just talked about this morning at Instructional Council, because it is just across the state. Chronic absenteeism is such a problem, and so now the state is stepping in to give some guidelines or playbook on how we can get students re-engaged in school. And so we're certainly not alone with it, and it's been a focus of our district, our DLT work, which is district leadership team, and then our building leadership teams are also doing work in their buildings so that we can get kids to school and keep them here.
Because these overall numbers are reflective of the fact that 22% aren't engaging.
Yeah, and the numbers were very high during COVID because it includes like all sick days. So when we were quarantining kids, you know, and that was out of their control, well, our chronic absenteeism numbers were just out of this world. So we are making progress. We don't have those excuses, the quarantining and the COVID rules and all of those things anymore. But what we're seeing is that it's just becoming harder to get kids to fully re-engage in school and
It's almost
not miss
become
so
a
many days.
culture thing where it's, you're not going to go to school, it's almost accepted. You know, the C word again, did a lot of bad things, and that was one of them, made it very easy just not to show up, and that's kind of how it's continued on, unfortunately.
Yeah.
You don't feel like going, just stay home. So,
I would just add, this is probably one of those things that the average citizen across the state and the country has no idea how big of a problem it has become. And honestly, school districts have been fighting this for quite some time, even pre-COVID. And you would just, there are a variety, there are lots of reasons. Every situation is unique. But the fact of the matter is, there are a lot of students who resist coming to school. Their parents, you know, may not be supportive of trying to do their part to get their child to come to school. There are times when the parent is trying very, very hard and, you know, may contact law enforcement to ask for assistance to try to get to a student to come to school. The state has changed their approach over the years in terms of taking students to court. That used to be the process, and that has changed significantly. It's now the burden is on the districts, a heavy burden on them to put attendance teams in place and go through these multi-step processes. But it's complicated and it is surprising, but it isn't for those of us who have been in education for a while, but I think it is to the average citizen. So it's a problem and has been. So
again, it goes back to culture. You know, I'll say back in the day, there was truant officers, and you didn't go to school. There was legal ramifications, and those have been dismissed, and it's really sad. So.
One last question for you, and I bet you can't answer it.
I bet you can.
Bet you can. 2 years in this system, right? Before that, a system. Before that, another system. Now, with the state's takeover of public education, are we going to stay in this system?
Okay, I
Or
bet you
just a
can.
matter of some short period of time, there'll probably be a new system?
You are right. I have no idea how to answer that. Who knows what the new do will do.
Way to say it.
Well, you keep working hard in this system. The numbers show it. Thank you very much. Thank you to the team for being here tonight.
Thank you all.
Great.